Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Susley, before I begin, this idea of expertise is an interesting one because sometimes we have, and people can chuckle, but sometimes we have a, okay, I apologize. I thought that it was a tuckle to my question. People can have different views on expertise, but in my view, 17 years of real-world expertise or real-world knowledge is highly beneficial to this committee, so I thank you for being here. Sir, do you fear any repercussions for what you are saying to this committee here?
I do.
Do you feel fear, I should say?
Yeah, I anticipate some kind of punitive response to this.
Would you be prepared to let this committee know if there is any sort of response or follow from your testimony here today, given that you were invited by parliamentarians and are simply answering questions from parliamentarians truthfully?
I have no concern with doing that.
I'm going to ask you about gangs in jail and how it's communicated to the public and parliamentarians by the CSC and what's really happening. Do you have any comment on gangs in jail and how that's being communicated and what's really going on?
The CSC prides themselves in having successfully eliminated gangs out of Canadian prisons a number of years ago. I believe it was 2014, 2015. That is a celebrated accomplishment amongst the brass of the CSC, which was accomplished by changing the name of gangs to security threat groups.
Like, what does that mean? Security threat groups? Was it simply just a change in the name, and therefore we say no gangs exist? Do I have that right?
Yes, it was a name change that out of one side of the mouth eliminated gangs, and on the other hand created a very new problem with a very newly named group.
Somebody was to testify before Parliament and say, gangs are not an issue, but we didn't know this, and we have to say security threat groups are. That's certainly misleading in my view. I want you to talk as well about, we are told that in corrections there's safe, secure, humane control, and people are transferred in consistent, when I say transferred down security from maximum to medium to minimum, in accordance with their risk to public safety and things like that. Do you have any comment on that, sir?
That's a very hot issue amongst correctional officers about what we perceive and believe is the inaccurate security classification of inmates being inappropriately downgraded or downgraded through security levels without the outside of where that inmate is fit to be operating in. When we have a maximum security inmate positioned into a medium or minimum security environment, of course that produces all kinds of threats to us and to the public.
And is the public, is this type of thing routinely communicated to parliamentarians and the public?
It's very rarely communicated to anyone internally. I would be shocked if it was communicated externally at all. It's usually done through the form of what's called overrides.
Overrides, okay. What's an override is when a manager essentially says, I disagree with what the computer has spit out and I'm going to change that on my own. That's a kind of crude way of putting it. Is that accurate?
Essentially.
How much time do I have, Mr. Chair, please?
A minute and 10 seconds.
Okay, in a minute and 10 seconds, when somebody's incarcerated, there's a perception that this person is especially in medium and maximum, but people perceive minimum, which has no fences, that people are behind fences. Are there times where people have work clearances or unofficially are escorted out of jails in your experience, contrary to policy, and is that ever communicated?
Absolutely, that happens on an extremely, I would suggest, daily basis in most institutions across the country.
You describe, without breaching any confidentiality or anything like that, describe a scenario that is common knowledge to somebody in your industry?
We have inmates serving life sentences who are not eligible for any forms of parole, but are given fence clearance to work off-site and not out of perimeter during the business day.
Communicated to the public or parliamentarians in annual reports or anything like that?
No, not communicated anywhere.
I assume that's my time, Mr. Chair.
It's close to it. Thank you, Mr.